Good evening. In this broadcast, the information program Time. Today, the executive director of the International Monetary Fund, Michel Comdeciu, arrived in Moscow. This visit was very anticipated in Moscow because on the results of the dialogues with Michel Comdeciu will depend whether Russia will be allotted the $6 billion credit. And the money of the International Monetary Fund was already taken into account in compiling the budget for the Russian Federation for 1995. The significance of the imminent meetings with the director of the IMF is reflected by the fact that the Prime Minister of Russia's government, arrived in the airport to greet him. It's worth it to remind you that last week, Viktor Chernomyrdin and Michel Comdeciu met in Paris, after which they made extremely optimistic statements. The essence of the statements was that in Moscow, the final I's must be dotted in the agreement on a major standby loan. It's not superfluous to remind you that the approach of Western investors toward Russia remains extremely suspicious, and this suspicion was especially augmented after the October Black Tuesday in the Chechen conflict. Because of events in Chechnya in February, the talks with the IMF were interrupted. But no matter what, immediately after arrival, directly in the airport, the talks began between Michel Comdeciu and Viktor Chernomyrdin and other members of government. The sides are placing final accents on the agreement before its signing. Of primary significance is strict financial policies conducted by Russian leadership and decreasing tempos of inflation. It's planned that Friday, Michel Comdeciu will be received by Boris Yeltsin, after which the signing of the significant financial document will take place. And today, Boris Yeltsin in the Kremlin met with the ministers of foreign affairs of the European trio, France, Germany, and Spain. Russia firmly intends to continue its course of democratic reforms. In the Kremlin was stated by Boris Yeltsin today, receiving the ministers of foreign affairs of France, Alain Juppé, Germany, Klaus Kinkel, and Spain, Javier Solana, and also members of the European Union concerning foreign political matters, Hans van der Broek. The president noted that the country is for political resolution of the Chechen conflict and to restore democratic lawfulness and hold free elections. The head of state spoke out for the quickest possible movement toward a broad-scale agreement on partnership and cooperation between Russia and the European Union, signed on the Greek island Corfu last year. Later, in the Foreign Affairs Estate, Spiridonovka, almost 2 hours of dialogue were held between the Western European diplomats with Andrei Kozyrev, and again in the center of attention were topics of interaction between Russia and the European Union, the crisis in Chechnya, the problem in relations with NATO and former Yugoslavia. The main thing is that the heads of the Western European Foreign Affairs departments had a full opportunity to express their opinions on Chechnya. They emphasized that the European Union does not want to isolate Russia. On the contrary, is for a broad-scale cooperation with it, but feels that Russia must fulfill its obligations that it has undertaken. At the press conference upon completion of dialogues, Andrei Kozyrev stated that Russia is not only for a political method of regularization, but for permanent presence of OSCE representatives in the conflict zone. Of course, we welcome the participation of the OSCE, even to the point of preparing for and conducting elections. The only thing which we object to is that this most complicated situation would be interpreted in an abbreviated, simplified form and would become a stumbling block in our cooperation. Were the emissaries satisfied with the results of the meeting in the Russian capital, and when will the suspension of the signing of the temporary trade agreement between Russia and the organization be lifted? The future will show. Today is the 9th day since the murder of Vladislav Listyev. During these very moments in the Luzhniki Stadium, a benevolent concert is underway dedicated to his memory. Funds generated from the concert will become the basis of an annual Vladislav Listyev Award, founded by the Union of Journalists of Russia, to be awarded to the best journalist of the year. In January, Vlad Listyev himself was named best journalist of the previous year. He handed his winnings over to the family of a killed correspondent of the Red Star in Chechnya, Vladimir Zhatarenko. Since morning today, thousands of people came to Vagankovskaya Cemetery, to the tomb of Vladislav Listyev, in order to honor his memory. Meanwhile, the investigation of the murder of Vlad Listyev continues, and today our correspondent Lana Garbanova again met with representatives of the independent group of journalists conducting an alternative investigation. In the opinion of specialists, 10 days is a type of indicative time limit in investigating such a complicated case as the murder of Vlad Listyev. And if immediately the tracks of the murderers of Vlad Listyev were not immediately found, naturally with each day it's more complicated. Today is the 9th day. In the interest of the investigation, official organs refrained from commentary, and again speaking with us was the head of the independent group of journalists conducting an alternative investigation, Yuri Chikachishin. We're of the opinion today that these composite drawings were decoys to detract attention. And although it's possible that such people do exist, but judging from the phone calls which we received, like a Bulgakov situation, people simultaneously saw the same individuals not only in Moscow, but in many other cities of the country. I think that, yes, these are real criminals, but they're not connected with the murder of Listyev. Moreover, I think that perhaps they can even be found, and then they'll say, well, finally we've found these murderers. And then the investigation will be drawn out for a year, and the public turbulence will die down somewhat. The former prosecutor of Moscow, Gennady Ponomarev, dismissed in the beginning of the week after the murder of Vladislav Listyev, feels that the board of the Office of the Prosecutor General should return to a more thorough and all-encompassing analysis of the situation in the capital regarding the question of the responsibility of the prosecutor for its condition. As Interfax reports, this morning Ponomarev participated in a meeting of the heads of the public prosecutor of the city and inter-regional prosecutorial offices of the capital dedicated to the dismissal of the city prosecutor. Ponomarev read his appeal to the board of the Prosecutor General, in which he expressed deep regret over the fact that the board of the Prosecutor General, which is required to observe lawfulness and be objective and just, has digressed from these requirements in examining the question of the prosecutor of Moscow. Meanwhile, the acting prosecutor of Moscow, Sergei Gerasimov, today submitted his notice of resignation, Interfax was told by a high-placed official of the capital prosecutor's office. According to him, in the statement directed to the Prosecutor General of Russia, Gerasimov expressed disagreement with the assessment of the investigative work of the prosecutor of Moscow issued at the panel of the Prosecutor General's office last Saturday after Listyev's murder. Another motive for the resignation notice was Gerasimov's objection to the dismissal of the prosecutor of Moscow, Gennady Ponomarev, the Interfax source asserts. Moscow city administration is preparing documents to appeal through courts personnel decisions made by federal departments after the murder of Vlad Listyev. Materials will be filed in city municipal courts depending on the location of the respondents. This, a correspondent of Vitortas was told today by the head of the State Legal Department of the Mayoralty, Sergei Dontsov. Yuri Loshkov intends to contest the decision made without the consent of city authorities by the prosecutor to dismiss the city prosecutor Gennady Ponomarev and the head of the city internal affairs Vladimir Pankratov, made by the Prosecutor General's office in the Ministry of Internal Affairs. In the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Russia, an operational headquarters was set up to coordinate services and the services of the Ministry and the City of Internal Affairs in the battle with crime. The analysis conducted by the headquarters and the leaders of the Ministry of Internal Affairs indicates that in several positions and directions, there's a need for interference by this organization into the functional actions of the City of Internal Affairs, because the statistics and dynamics of the crimes committed in Moscow is expressed in the growth of serious crimes. General Kulikov makes no issue over the fact that Vladimir Pankratov was dismissed as head of the City Internal Affairs of Moscow. He feels the capital militia has sufficiently strong and trained leadership capable of improving the situation in the city. The militia of Moscow is not decapitated, and personalities. This evidently is a question of time to be reflected in the decision of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. This is not a campaign, but over several months is the rhythmic work of the operational groups of the ministry or groups aiding the ministry to elevate the militia of Moscow and in a goal-oriented way to involve the militia of Moscow to improve law and order. The faction, Russia's Choice, intends to demand at the State Duma session Friday the resignation of the Minister of Internal Affairs, Viktor Yedin, the acting Prosecutor General, Alexei Yeroshenko, and the Director of the FSK, Sergei Stepashin. This was said today to Interfax by the leader of the faction, Russia's Choice, Yegor Gaidar. He noted that the Russia's Choice faction have a positive view toward the dismissals of the Prosecutor of Moscow, Gennady Ponomarev, and the head of the City of Internal Affairs Department, Vladimir Pankratov. The position of Russia's choice, according to its leader, is explained by extreme dissatisfaction with the condition of the battle with crime and the unsolved murders of the priest Alexander Menin, the journalists Dmitry Holodov and Vladislav Listyuv, deputies of the Duma Valentin Martinyan and Sergei Skorochkin. Today, our correspondent met with the authorized representative of the President in the Federal Assembly, Alexander Maximovich Yakovlev. We're undergoing an endurance test of the conditions of life within a democratic state, which demand an equal force, a strict vertical subordination of executive organs, and respect for the rights and constitutional prerogatives of the subjects of the Russian Federation, specifically the Moscow government. I must say that all the preceding history, the interaction between these two equally respected major government activists, would be an example of such a type of coordination. I want to express deep conviction and hope that state wisdom will permit to find a dignified solution for this situation. But as a lawyer, I can only note that in accordance with the Constitution, appointments of the prosecutors in the prosecutorial system, apart from the Prosecutor General, or appointments of heads of the City of Internal Affairs, requires coordination with the subjects of the Federation. But the dismissal of these people is the exclusive prerogative of executive power. We're speaking about a central problem for Russia. Are we going to be in a democracy and in strict order? Will we have discipline and order and freedom? This question essentially will be resolved, this is what we're expecting, by these two government figures whom I deeply respect. On Thursday night, the artillery of the federal forces launched sporadic artillery blows on positions of the Chechen insurrection near the populated points of the Achkoy-Martan region, subjected to firing in the populated points Samashki, Bamut, Zakanyurt, and Achkoy-Martan. Meanwhile, representatives of the Russian military and the prefect of the Achkoy-Martan region of Chechnya bordering with Ingushetia, Salama Umalatov, again met this evening at the controlled passing point of the Russian forces near the village Samashki. As a correspondent of Interfox reports, during the meeting they discussed the possibility of renewed dialogues in order to resolve the question of a ceasefire of all types of artillery weapons at the populated points of the Achkoy-Martanov region. The Republican television of Chechnya, restored after the events of the last months, will broaden the area of its broadcasting. The practical aid to Chechen television journalists in the near future will be provided by colleagues from Krasnodar and Astrakhan. This, a correspondent of Vitartas was told today in the press center of the Territorial Department of the Federal Organs of Executive Power. The restored television is operating in Chechnya from the regional center Znamenskaya at 1.5 hours a day, and the radius of transmission of the Republican television station is 100 kilometers. Joining in the aid to residents of Chechnya are major companies of Russia. The Petersburg Association, the Star Zvezda, is now a joint stock company and is known more to specialists. The country's largest producer of diesel engines for military and civil ships and diesel locomotives. 20 years ago, they established production of movable electrical stations for construction of the Baikal Railway. Later, these compact sources of electrical power were highly appreciated by oil and natural gas workers and troops of remote garrisons. Of course, as other giants of industry, the Star today is enduring difficult times. Volumes of productivity have declined, the staff has been reduced, but they rolled up their sleeves and entered with certain powers and composed a generator free of charge and assembled an aggregate for those enduring difficulties in Chechnya. This trailer is capable of providing light for a village of 10,000 population. Delegation of Russia headed by the General Director of the Federal Border Services, the Colonel General Andrei Nikolaev, today arrived in Tbilisi for a one-day business visit. Meetings were held with the head of the Georgian state at Shevardnadze, the Prime Minister, Motaran Patsadze, and other official figures, after which the signing of several documents occurred. These are matters of material technical provision and questions of financing. Apart from that, we also examined questions of equipment of the citizens of the Georgian Republic doing their service in the border troops of the Russian Federation, which provide protection for the Georgian-Turkish stretch, which is the common border for the Commonwealth countries. Today at the meeting with Edvard Shevardnadze, they discussed also the problem of Abkhazia. Such a number of generals as gathered today on the Poklonnaya Hill has probably never gathered before. The highest Russian officers from various types of services conducted the standard reconnaissance mission, more simply, examination and study of the venue where on the 9th of May the victory parade should occur. They were estimating where technology and troops should pass through, where to locate the tribune from which Pavel Grachev will address the troops. This should occur the 9th at midday, but 3 hours earlier on Red Square, the Assembly of Veterans of the Great Patriotic War will be addressed by President Yeltsin. In which site to erect a tribune is not yet known. Probably he will not speak from the mausoleum, however. After the speech of Yeltsin, the parade of the participants of the war will begin together with the subdivisions of the unit of the Moscow garrison. From the very beginning, within the organizational committee, the idea surfaced to allow on Red Square only one combined column of veterans consisting of 1,500 people, but they realized on time Red Square, for many of them, is the symbol of victory. Therefore, they changed the scenario. From 10 municipal districts in Moscow, we will form 10 columns, and one column, that is 1,500 people, will be a combined column. This parade will last somewhere around 45 minutes. Many members of the organizational committee spoke out for a military parade to be held on Red Square, but as is known, at Manege, the construction of an underground city is underway, therefore the technology simply won't be able to pass through, but aviation is not limited. This year, flying in the victory parade will be 80 planes of all forms of the armed forces of Russia. Thundering over the heads of Moscow and the guests of the capital will be Sturmoviks, bombers, destroyers, and even strategic bombers, the two 160s and two 95 MSs. The first Vice Premier of Russia, Alexis Kovets, tomorrow in the government will hold a business session in order to prepare for the official visit of the President of Russia to Ukraine. For the coming Russian-Ukrainian summit, which is planned for the end of March in Kiev, prepared for signature are more than 20 intergovernmental documents. The broad-scale agreement on friendship and cooperation is almost 90% completed, but the stumbling block in it remains the point on dual citizenship, Intertas reports. According to Boris Yeltsin's assertion, the official visit of the President of Russia to Ukraine will be possible only after the question of citizenship is resolved and other principal issues. The questions of military cooperation of the two countries were discussed in Moscow by the Ministers of Defense of Russia and Bulgaria, Pavel Grachev and Dmitry Pavlov. The ministers expressed regret that during the last 3 years, a weakening in ties between the two countries has occurred. They signed a program which includes coordination of the developments of weapons military technology for this year. They also implied that they still must solve the problem of how mutual accounting will be conducted. The sides noted the similarity in their positions regarding the broadening of NATO through the countries of Eastern and Central Europe. In their opinion, this would not serve to providing equal security for all the countries. Answering the press on the question about the situation in Chechnya, Pavel Grachev stated that this topic was not raised at the talks. He added that in Chechnya, basically, the military phase has been concluded, and there it's necessary to solve economic problems. The minister feels that solitary shots will be heard in Chechnya for a very long time to come. President of the United States, Clinton, has not yet decided regarding the schedule for his trip to Moscow. Press Secretary of the White House stated the statement was made in response to a request of journalists to announce when the president intends to avail himself of the invitation from the head of the state of Russia, Yeltsin, to arrive to Moscow for a summit. In the press initially, the 8th and the 9th of May was quoted during the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the victory of World War II. 2 American diplomats were killed and one was seriously injured yesterday in the Pakistani city of Karachi. The vehicle carrying the representatives of the American consulate was shot at with an automatic weapon by unidentified persons. The Prime Minister of Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto, who at that time was in Singapore on an official visit, condemned the murder in her native city and issued instructions to conduct a thorough investigation of the incident. In the beginning of March, she plans to visit the United States. Currently, the government of Pakistan has formed 2 investigative brigades to investigate the incident, and also a group of employees from the Federal Bureau of Investigation of the United States has arrived in Islamabad, which will conduct its own inquiry. This was reported by the American television company CNN. One of the killed employees employees of the American consulate was a CIA agent. President Clinton promised that the federal departments will do everything possible so that jointly with the government of Pakistan bring the culprits of the crime to justice. It's known that planned for the end of March is a foreign trip of Hillary Clinton, which includes a visit to Pakistan. For now, preparations for that trip are proceeding as scheduled, said the press secretary of the White House. Questions of Russian-Indian cooperation were in the center of attention at the meeting held in Copenhagen of the Deputy Chairman of the Government of Russia, Yuri Yadov, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of India, Pranab Mukherjee. The Russian Vice Premier and the head of the Indian Foreign Affairs are involved in the work in Denmark of the World Summit on Social Development. During the dialogues, they discussed concrete proposals to expedite realization of the joint project, the reconstruction of the Novorossiysk port. Participating in financing in this project, India may liquidate part of its debt to Russia. The delegation of the Duma faction, the Liberal Democratic Party, headed by its leader, was in India on the invitation of the Indian Council on Cultural Ties. And at the meeting with the Indian parliamentarians, Vladimir Zhirinovsky noted that the axis, Moscow-Delhi, should become an example of two-sided cooperation. However, among the multitude of kind words toward India, clearly unexpected for the Indian side was the statement made by Vladimir Zhirinovsky about the possibility of creating in the future a common Russian-Indian border. First of all, I have in mind strategic relations. India is a great country. It has almost 1 billion population with a powerful economy, but for good economic relations, it's ideal to have at least a small stretch of common border. According to Vladimir Zhirinovsky, he did not specifically mean India, but when he spoke about washing boots in the warm waters of the Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean is in congruity with many countries, and in respect to India, we have the most peace-loving intentions and desires. But if India itself desires that our fleet should be in the waters of the Indian Ocean instead of the American, why not do this? Bangladesh has for almost a quarter of a century been pursuing the path of independence and doesn't intend to part with sovereignty. This was stated today by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of that country, Mustafizur Rahman, to the statement of the leader of the LDP, Zhirinovsky, who during his visit to Delhi said that Bangladesh and Pakistan should be joined to India. In Greece, during the third vote yesterday in the parliament, the elected president of the country is Konstantinos Stephanopoulos. He replaces Karamanlis, whose term expires the 5th of May in that post. Today's visit of the Queen of Great Britain, Elizabeth II, to Northern Ireland is seen as evidence of normalization of the situation in that British province. The previous visit of the Queen to Northern Ireland was conducted in an atmosphere of top secrecy. The Ministerial Council of France has defined the date for the next presidential elections. The first round of elections will be held the 23rd of April, the 2nd, the 7th of May. The term in office of the President of France, Mitterrand, expires on the 20th of May. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Israel, Shimon Peres, intends to crown his political career with the submission of his candidacy to the post of Secretary General of the United Nations Organization. Reporting this, an Israeli responsible source also informed that in the preliminary and unofficial plan, this ambition of the head of the Foreign Affairs Department of Israel was supported by the presidents of the United States and France. Although the electoral union, the coalition party at the parliamentary elections, held a major victory, acquiring more than 30% of the votes, dialogues about forming a new government will probably be very complicated because the Reform Party, which at the elections received second place, and the centrist, which is in third place, see no possibility for now to cooperate within the same government. Although all three major political forces are for the continuation of reforms, their pre-election platforms were different after all, and now, to begin joint work within the government, someone must at least partially reject some pre-election promises. And if a common language is found, eventually also there may be a quite unusual situation for a democratic country. The Estonian parliament may turn out to have no opposition at all. Therefore, the main candidate for Prime Minister Tito Vehi faces difficult times of complicated dialogues. In Belgium, the scandal is escalating around the Secretary-General of NATO. The seat under the Secretary-General of NATO began to tremble. The news is reported by all information agencies. Recently elected, Willy Klaas to that post apparently was involved in an unpleasant matter. His name is more mentioned in coordination with the so-called Augusta affairs. Through this Italian firm, Belgium bought combat helicopters, and all the high-placed officials who were involved in the dialogues ostensibly received major undeclared commissions, more simply, bribes. The police has been investigating the matter for a long time, and a new impulse was contributed by the mysterious death of the former commander of the Belgian Air Force, the Lieutenant General Jacques Lefebvre. His body was found yesterday in one of the downtown hotels in Brussels. The police is hesitant to say whether this was a suicide or a murder. Only a few details are known around the body. According to this agency Reuters, empty whiskey bottles were found, and there were no signs of a violent death or murder. The death of this general is connected with the Augusto matter. He was involved in dialogues on the purchase of those ill-fated 46 Italian helicopters. Just prior to his death, the police had interrogated him. At times when the deceased general was the commander of the Air Force of Belgium, the current NATO Secretary-General Willy Klaas was the economics minister of the country, and such a major deal could not have bypassed his attention, especially since during one of the searches on this matter, letters were found signed by Willy Klaas. The content is not disclosed in the interest of the investigation. However, Western journalists are already building active suppositions regarding whether the Secretary-General of NATO, Willy Klaas, among those who, in 1989, received a certain sum in the form of gratitude for the signing of a contract. The eternal topic in contemporary art of the artists of Russia and the Russian abroad. Under this title, in the Paris headquarters of UNESCO, an exhibit was held, initiated by the permanent representation of Russia in UNESCO and with the cooperation of several French and Russian organizations. At its private viewing, which became an event for the public, the large public, and for the authors of the works as well, young and prominent ones, a broad panorama of fine and classical art of Russian masters was presented from various generations whose works are connected with Moscow, St. Petersburg, the abroad, including those with broad world acclaim, Mikhail Shemyakin, Anatoly Slepyshev, Oskar Rabin, and many others. Each has his own identity, manner, artistic signature. The variety of genres, artistic schools, combined with the experience of recognized masters and young prodigies, marvelously unveil the content of the new Russian art, full of academic quality and an unusual freedom of self-expression. The value of the exhibit is not just in its artistic wealth, but in the symbolic wealth, the reunification after decades here of alienation and intolerance of two branches which had been severed by ideological press of the Russian School of Art. And in Russia and beyond it, artists fortunately remain dedicated to its rich traditions for the search of absolute values which they manifest currently through the eternal themes of good and evil, love, beauty, and harmony. Deciding to leave the Bolshoi Theater of Russia is its main ballet master, Yuri Grigorovich. This he stated in an interview to Itartas today. Yuri Grigorovich stated that he submitted his resignation back on the 15th of September of last year. He said this step was dictated by the conflict situation which developed in the Bolshoi. As is known, then its artistic leadership and artistic staff announced that it was impossible to continue working further with the general director Vladimir Kokonin. Now, as Grigorovich said, a government decision has become known. A group of artists from the Bolshoi who recently visited the Vice Premier Yuri Yadov managed to clarify during conversation that the director will remain in his position. Apart from that, the post of artistic director is introduced, to which Vladimir Vasilyev is appointed. Today, on the birthday of Yuri Gagarin, to the town Gagarin in the Smolensk district, Russian cosmonauts, scientists, and specialists arrived. The meeting was dedicated also to the 30th anniversary of the first step of man into outer space. The exhibit dedicated to the event was opened by Alexei Leonov. 3 decades ago, he was the first to be in outer space. Participants of the meeting also visited the village Klushino, where in 1934, the first cosmonaut of the planet was born. With this, I bid you farewell, and in half a moment, Ilya Kukin awaits you with the sports news. All the best. Good evening. As you probably already know, the Russian soccer team opened the calendar of the international matches of the season with a defeat from the Slovakian team on its field 1-2. Both balls into our goal were scored by Piotr Dubovsky. The only response goal 15 minutes before the end was scored by Valery Karpin. A few moments ago in Moscow, the first quarter-final match of the European Basketball Championships came to an end. The Moscow Army against the Greek Olympiakos. For fans of basketball, I'll say that you can see the match at 00 hours on television company Ostankino. The match deserves to be seen because of its level of tension, but I will announce the result, 95-65. The excellent victory for the CSKA. In the English bringing game, the first round of medals was won in the figure skating championships. The Czech pair, Kovačik and Novotná, won the world title. The Russians, Shishkova and Naumov, won the silver medals. During these moments in the Canadian Thunder Bay, the first format of the program in the ski championships is coming to an end. The 30-kilometer race for men. At this distance, there was no equal to Vladimir Smirnov from Kazakhstan, and no wonder the famous Norwegian Bjorn Deli feared him most of all. At the famous tennis tournament Newsweek Cup in the Indian Wells in the United States, the elite of the world tennis world have gathered. Agassi, Becker, Chang, Martin, and Medvedev successfully went through the second round, and only the 9th seed of the tournament, Jim Corea, lost to Carlos Costa from Spain. The New York Rangers are repeating the performance as the undisputed leaders of the season last year. Another victory, 6-4 over New Jersey, the 7th for New York in the last 10 matches. We'll congratulate Alexander McGinley from Buffalo. In yesterday's game against Montreal, he scored his 200th goal of his NHL career. Hello. Tomorrow, according to the reports of the Oceanic Meteorological Center, the weather in the Murmansk area, the north of the Arkhangelsk district, in the Nenets Autonomous District, and in the Republic of Komi will be formed under the influence of an anticyclone with a center over Novaya Zemlya. Meteorologists expect partly cloudy skies without much precipitation, temperatures from -7 to 12. In the northeast of Komi, in the Nenets Autonomous District, -15 to 20. The cyclones over the northern Ural and the south of Finland are connected with an atmospheric front in its zone in Karelia in the northwestern area, in the south of the Arkhangelsk district, and in Komi. Cloudy skies are expected with rain and wet snow, in some places fog. Temperatures during the night and day -3 to +2. The Volga-Vatsk and central region are in a belt of high pressure connected with an anticyclone over Kazakhstan. Here it's variably cloudy without precipitation during the day, +2 to 7. In the Baltic states and the Kaliningrad district, tomorrow, the influence of an anticyclone with a center over the south of the Baltic Sea will play its role, bringing variably cloudy skies without precipitation, +1 to 6 degrees. An atmospheric front tomorrow will pass over the territories of Belarus and Ukraine, bringing cloudy skies and isolated rain, morning and evening fog. In Belarus, +3 to 8. In Ukraine, +8 to 13 degrees. In Moldova and the west of Ukraine, the probability of rain is quite low. During the day, +4 to 9. The central Chernozem region, the central and lower Volga, Kalmykia, the Stavropol, Krasnodar, Rumelia, republics of the northern Caucasus, as previously, are in a belt of high pressure. It will remain mostly sunny without precipitation. During the day, +10 to 15 degrees. In Chechnya, Ingushetia, and Dagestan, fog, temperatures of +7 to 10. Beyond the Caucasus, it's mostly clear in Georgia, Azerbaijan, +15. In Armenia, 2 to 3 degrees cooler. In St. Petersburg, cloudy with some patches of drizzle. At night, 0 +2. During the day, +2 to 4 degrees. In Moscow and suburbs, variably cloudy skies without precipitation. Temperatures at night, 0 -2 degrees. During the day, +4 to 6. This was the forecast of the weather for the 10th of March.